coach for many years and an athlete for many years. You've got the set up with my Olympic torch in the background there. So, you know, and we'll do a little question and answer afterwards, but I want to get started just on the concept of what we're doing here. So every sport, okay, and Jade, I don't know what happened. Oh, no, never mind, there it goes. Every sport has its moments when we are trying to figure out who we are, you know, where we fit in the world around us. And traditionally, sport has been for a very long time a way into any culture, not just the American culture, but really any culture. You can talk to everybody from immigrants in one country to soldiers. You know, Afghanistan, US soldiers talked about bringing soccer balls and footballs and playing with the kids there. That this is a way of bringing people together. And for Latinos, it's no different. And Latinos are known for a couple of things in particular. Baseball and boxing in the US are the big ends. And of course, football and even football has been ways that we've moved into our world here. The importance of this is because we all need history. We all need inspiration, and we all need heroes. No matter how you look at it, people want heroes and images of individuals that are like them. You know, whether you are a Latino male or a Caucasian female, we all want to see people like us succeeding. And it's one thing to talk about the American dream and anybody can achieve, and it's a totally different situation when you are a brown female watching nothing but Caucasian males succeed. It doesn't quite translate. So the concept of sport as an in is something that we've seen throughout history. But I am going to start, when it comes to sports in the US, at least, and Latinos, I'm going to start with, in my opinion, my personal opinion, the best of the best, the great Pele. If you don't know who Pele was, shame on you. I grew up, to give you an idea, I grew up in Barrington, Rhode Island, which when I was a kid had an active Puritan church. I'm talking the Puritans. We had an active Puritan church in my town. You simply didn't get more white American. It was the home of golf, no alcohol, no entertainment, and the Puritans. But even I knew who Pele was. Entonces, antes do nacimiento, he was named the International Olympic Committee's Athlete of the Century. I didn't even know they had athletes of the century. Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people of the entire 20th century. He had 1,279 goals in 1,363 games. The man was simply amazing as a player, amazing as an athlete, and amazing as a groundbreaking trendsetter, particularly because he came from a tremendously poor background. He talked about learning how to play soccer by having socks stuffed with newspapers that he and his friends would kick around. And he went from that to being the International Football Society's Athlete of the Century. I can remember small white kids in Rhode Island wanting to be Pele when they grew up, of all things. It was amazing. And what's amazing about that is not just the athleticism. I mean, no matter how you look at it, he had a goal in almost every game he played. That's unheard of in soccer and football. Add to that the cultural inroads, and he is by far one of the most influential players, representatives of ever in terms of Latinos. And notice I say Latinos because Pele was, of course, from Brazil, where they speak Portuguese. Right? So not a Hispanic, but a Latino. And we sometimes get those terms mixed and used together, and that's okay. Bottom line was, he was the one that opened the doors. Along with Ted Williams, and I love Ted Williams as a Latino player because until you look at the background, you don't get more American white than a Boston player. This is Ted Williams. But Ted Williams, his father was Irish, his mother was Mexican. And he used his father's name because he realized that in the 1930s, being recognized as having a Mexican background would hinder his career. At the same time, he never hid his background. He was known in interviews for going out and talking about his Tio Venzor, who he credits with teaching him to play the game, teaching him to love the game, and in particular, teaching him the unique batting position he used, the batting stance he used, which earned him, of course, the nickname of the Splendid Splinter. He was one of the groundbreaking heroes of baseball after World War I, before World War II, during World War II, and did all of this while not exactly out and about as a Latino, but certainly wasn't hiding it, did not deny it. When asked about it, would more than happily, yes, my mother was from Mexico, and this is where I learned this love of the game. And other people might argue with me on this, but I would say that Ted Williams was the one that really opened the doors of Latino baseball, because he did it in this sort of genial, likable way where everybody was okay with it. So that when the full Latinos coming from El Salvador and the Dominican Republic showed up, it wasn't as difficult. We didn't need that, if you will, that Jackie Robinson moment of really hard, groundbreaking acceptance. Ted Williams kind of did it in the slide. So by the time we got Roberto Clemente coming along, the great Roberto Clemente, people were already making jokes about this. Looking at the people on this feed, most of you are too young to remember the great Saturday Night Live skit, "Baseball been very, very good to me." And this was a direct, not commentary, but mocking, if you will, of people like Roberto Clemente, these Hispanic players who were just dominating Major League Baseball in the 1950s. And Saturday Night Live with James Belushi and that era, Gilda Radner, they came out with this character, this Hispanic baseball player, and that was his iconic line. Every time he showed up, he would say, "Well, baseball being very, very good to me." And that was about all he would say. But it caught on. For the Pittsburgh Pirates, which is the only team that Clemente played for, he was known as having this style which he brought with him from Puerto Rico, where it was almost a form of punishment. Roger Angel was famously quoted as saying he played a kind of baseball that none of us had ever seen before, as if it were a form of punishment for everyone else on the field. Like, how dare you come out here and try to compete with me? At the same time, he was very, not vocal, but he was not shy of pointing out that while he was Puerto Rican and an American citizen, he still wasn't really considered an American. We see this today with the the Hurricane Relief Fund of Puerto Rico. It amazes me that we still have so many people in our country who think Puerto Rico is another country. You know, they're not a state, but they've been part of our country for decades. And he would point that out whenever possible. From Roberto Carente, we go to Oscar de la Hoya. Easily one of the most recognizable names in sport. The Golden Boy. And yes, he was a tremendous boxer. We can start there. He brought Latinos into the spotlight. He was one of the first really strong Latino boxers. But what became groundbreaking for Latinos was that he was the first to own a boxing company. He created Golden Boy Boxing using his nickname, which he got, of course, as an Olympic gold medalist. They called him the Golden Boy. They actually called him that before the medal, but that sort of really solidified it, if you will. But he started his own firm and created an age when Latinos could come into boxing, not just because they had the skill and the determination, but because they had the credentials for it. They had the backing, they had the company. And Oscar de la Hoya still is, unless he's died recently, I think he's still alive, but he's, you know, he pioneered the ability to come into that world. We can't talk about Latinos in sport without talking about this picture. So most people recognize this photo, 1968 Olympics, where the two American athletes raised their fists, black gloved, in support of racial inequality protests that were taking place in the US. Sounds kind of similar. But what most people don't realize is that the bronze medalist, the guy all the way on the right there, that is Juan Carlos. He was in solidarity with the Black Panthers and the African Americans, but he was a Latino. And he saw this not only as a moment of his own strength and support, but as coming out in support of other, now we refer to them as brown peoples, right? Other brown peoples that were oppressed. This moment in sport, on the Olympic stand, for those of you that don't know, by the way, this is against the rules. The Olympic rules are very clear that athletes can do whatever they like off the field, but on the field, on the medal stands, they are international competitors. We are part of the international movement. We are all together. There is no room for protest, for politics, for gender equality, none of that. Do that all you want off the field. So this, by doing this, not only did they bring a huge spotlight onto what was occurring, they risked being stripped of their medals. The Olympic Committee could have gone to them and said, hey, you broke the rules, give them back. Obviously they didn't. But that's part of why this is such an iconic moment. Worldwide, no way of stopping it, televised, they couldn't take it back. And at this point in time, the Olympics had to make that choice. Do we allow these people this protest, or do we punish them for something that, while is against the rules, we kind of support? And luckily, it went the way of support. Even in sports that you wouldn't normally consider or equate with Latinos, we've got Chichi Rodriguez. And let's face it, a big part of the success and inroads made by Juan Rodriguez is the fact that he is just such a charismatic and enjoyable person. just saying his name kind of makes you smile. People that are familiar with him, he goes, oh, it's Chichi Rodriguez. You just can't help but kind of grin up at that. In golf, of all areas, golf is not known as a sport for people outside of rich white suburban America. It's just not. It's expensive to take part in. You have to have clubs, and you have to have greens fees, and you have to have transportation, and you have to, I mean, it is, even for people that just play it here and there for fun, it is a very expensive sport to use. And that has made it traditionally difficult to break into, because not only did you have to break through the racial barriers and the cultural barriers, but you also had to break through the financial and there's another word for that I'm drawing a blank on, but through those financial barriers as well, economics, the economical barriers. And Juan Rodriguez did that. He was the first Latino inducted into the Golf Hall of Fame. That should say golf, not gold. He opened golf to Latinos and minorities throughout the country, not only by being the example, but also by funding programs, funding scholarships, and just no matter what anybody thought of him in terms of a Latino entering the world of golf, nobody didn't like him. He was just one of the most liked, happy, charismatic, and adored people out there. And it's hard to hate an entire culture when the person that you're talking to is just so nice. He showed a whole new way of doing things. Before Chichi, a lot of these groundbreaking athletes, they were intense. And he was certainly intense, don't get me wrong, but De La Hoya, and they were intense, hard people. And then along comes Chichi. Hey, it's Chichi. You know, it sounds like something you would, for those of you non-Latinos, it sounds like something you would call a small dog. Hey, Chichi, come here, right? It's hard not to smile. And he brought that to the sport, and he brought that then to the cultural exchange. All the way up to Anthony Munoz. Another sport you don't usually think of with Latinos is American football. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't know a whole lot of gigantic Latinos. I know a lot of Latinos, and they're good at what they do. But when you think of 6'8" and 350-pound, El Salvador does not come to mind. It's just not what leaps up there. And along comes Anthony Munoz in 1980. He was not just breaking barriers, but breaking molds. And probably breaking a lot of bones at the same time. He brought a new style of play to football. In particular, he was an offensive lineman. And up until that point, offensive linemen were not considered as agile and speedy as Munoz was. And as he changed how that position was played, he opened it to a lot of Latinos and African Americans and others who had a different style of play that just was considered, you know, not real, not American. He is still the first and only Latino in the Football Hall of Fame. That being said, I don't think there's more than a handful of Latino players, so over time that will change. And I love that his standard picture is this one of him wearing the jersey that just says American. He wanted it to be very clear. One of my personal favorites, David Ortiz. I'm from Boston, so of course I'm a Red Sox fan. And, you know, there's nobody in the last, I would say, 100 years of baseball that were as respected and loved as Big Papi. Just the fact that he went by the nickname Big Papi, right? Everybody liked him. He was not only a model for Latino athletes, but for all of the athletes. Known for being kind and generous, humble, and always smiling. When he retired and all of the accolades came out and all of the papers, everything, every single interview always said, and he's always smiling. He's always happy. He's always smiling. Now, to be fair, he was a poor young man from the Dominican Republic who was making, $15 million a year. Of course he's smiling, but it was just his persona, the way that he approached the world. Some of you may, if you know Ortiz, you're aware of a couple of years ago, he was shot. And it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. But the outrage in multiple countries that anybody would go after this guy who is so nice. It wasn't that he was a sports hero who was attacked. It was that it was him. He showed, just like Chichi, he showed this aspect of the Latino culture that is warm and welcoming and happy and smiling, that says no matter what else is going on there, yeah, when we get on the field, I'm going to do my best to beat you. But when we're off the field, it's all good. And you know what? Even on the field, I might flash you a little smile and while we're at it. It brought a new viewpoint, and people responded to that. And then, of course, his iconic moment after the Boston Marathon bombing, when he talked about the need to unify and said, this is our city. At that point, he was an iconic legend, and that wasn't going to change. But I don't want to only talk about athletes, because while there were certainly a lot of Hispanic athletes, there are other Hispanics who changed the world of our sport. And if you forgive me for one moment, I have a dog sitting back here. It's okay, bud. I am right here. He is whining and upset because he can't see me. Okay, bud. I'm right here. Sorry about that. Andreas Cantor. You can't talk about sport without talking about this man. People all over the world know who this guy is without knowing his name. His yell of goal. Oh yeah, him. Yeah. The passion that he exudes, and this is something you hear all the time. Oh, those fiery Latinos, those passionate people that hips, right? This was the epitome of that just outright ferocious excitement and passion at sport. And you've got to give Cantor a lot of credit for that. He was a big part of pushing that into the cultural norm, if you will. Linda Alvarado, she's the owner of the Colorado Rockies, and she's a good example of the modern Latino in sport. Sure, there's still a lot of athletes out there, but we now have sportscasters, lots of sportscasters, because what do athletes do after they retire but become sportscasters, right? There's owners, they're managers, agents, commentators, scouts. The world of sport has opened to the Latino population in the past 50 years in a way that people like Pele probably never would have imagined. It has become an area where we are no longer just the athlete. We are now the people running the athletes, finding this talent, bringing the talent in, coaching the talent, managing the talent. And because of these people, because of these trendsetters, the doors are open for more than just the poor kid from Brazil. All the way up to this Alberto Jose character, world martial arts champion from 2000 to 2008, 15 gold medals, 8 silver, 2 bronze, Olympian Maccabia bronze medalist, head coach for the US team, international representative, Hall of Fame inductee. There's no way that I would have been here had it not been for these people before me. To give you an idea, when I graduated with my bachelor's degree in writing and literature and said, I'm going to go work and be an athlete, my mother said it was the worst day of her life. Because my mother is a scientist, my father's a scientist, my brother's a scientist. But I went and got a job as a newspaper reporter and an athlete, of all things, athletics. The day I was inducted into the Hall of Fame, my parents said, well, I guess you know what you're doing with this stuff. It's okay. But that being said, when I went back to school after I retired from sport, went back to school, got my master's, got my doctorate, started doing work in medical research, my mother said that my return to school was the happiest day of her life. So we may have some way to go for Latinos in sport, but certainly it would not have been something that was an accomplishable goal before that. So there's my brief history of Latino in sport. And I will happily answer any questions, hear what you have to go from. I see from our chat that Oscar de la Hoya is still alive. Excellent. I thought he was, but I wasn't positive. And the medals, the Olympic medals, they weren't pulled, but they were expelled from the games. So they got a little bit of a slap, but not nearly as much as could have been.
Alberto,
yeah.
Very, very nice presentation. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Of course, you can't get to everybody. There's always gonna be somebody left out and all that kind of stuff. I've got to go take kids to an activity, but thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Oh, you're very welcome. I enjoyed it too. Cheers.
Take care.
I have a question for you, and I had it in the, hello, thank you so much. You're a rock star. For those of you who don't understand what we were trying to do, we were trying to get a Smithsonian exhibit in, and then Dr. Friedman was going to lead in discussion and have some really content to go with it. But he stepped up and nonetheless presented us with some really good information. I know none of this, which was totally good. So this is my question.
Yes.
Do you, okay, going back to Ted. Okay, so I'm going
Yes.
back to Ted. Do you think, now he intentionally took his father's name.
Right.
With the understanding that if he didn't, if he used his mother's heritage, you know, more so than his father's, do you think that was a conscious decision? I know I can't
Yes.
make it.
And he had said as much, that he was very well aware that if he had used his mother's name, it would have been a stumbling block. And he did not want to intentionally do so. And taking your mother's name would have been a fairly odd thing to do in the 1930s anyway. So he was very well aware of that, but it was also why he did not shy away from reporters or others who said, well, you know, isn't your mother from Mexico? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And would consistently credit his tios with being the ones who instilled the love of baseball into him. Absolutely.
Did like his parents purposely give him like a first name like Ted, like so it didn't, like his whole name didn't sound like Latino, or is that just by chance?
That I don't know. My instinct from what I've read is that was the Irish side. You know, and his father was from Ireland, so it was probably a and I don't know any. I have nothing to base this on except my own thought. It's probably a compromise between Seamus and Armando. I said, well, how about Ted? That's a good middle ground.
really enjoyed it. Honestly only knew Pele. That's the only one I knew.
Any other questions? Anything you would like to know? I am happy to share.
Oh, one sport that you didn't cover was basketball.
Yes.
Hockey?
Go ahead.
Basketball, hockey. I mean, okay.
There are a few in both basketball and hockey, and really every sport. There is no sport that does not have Latino representation. I wanted to hit sort of the highlights. Again, you know, as in American football, I don't know a whole lot of 7'4" Latinos. It's just not something I've come across. But certainly there have been, yes, absolutely. National Basketball League, National Women's Basketball League. Their golf seems to be following Chi-Chi, one of the areas that a lot of Latino Americans are pursuing and doing very, very well in. Hockey, not so much, little bits, but not that many. I think most Latino mothers don't want to give their kids a stick. And so, I don't mind looking.
Hey, Alberto, doing this. Jay Coakley, famous sociologist, sports sociologist here in the U.S., is famous for saying that if you want to know who's in the lowest social class, you look at boxing. You look at who is boxing. And so wondered if you wanted to address something about the Latino experience within sport and how that plays into or has grown out of social standing within society, American society, that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a sport where you make your living being hit and hitting other people. Whether you are somebody who appreciates it, who thinks of it as the sweet science, or whether you think of it as two guys just beating the heck out of each other. Yeah, very few people grow up going, I want to be the pugilist. We see it now in MMA. We see a lot of the same these people from lower incomes, from disadvantaged areas, who part of it is the lack of equipment that's necessary for it. I think part of it personally as well comes from wanting to hit something. I've got to say, just on a little side note, when I was in Sydney, I found out, I was about 2 days into the 4 days of my competition, and I found out that my next opponent was the champion from Venezuela. And my father is from Venezuela. So I called him on the phone from Australia and said, hey, Dad, I'm going to go in the ring tomorrow, and I'm going to take out all of my childhood frustrations on your countrymen. And for me, it was very cathartic. I felt great. You know, here's we're not letting me go to the movies. And here's so I think there's something to be said for that, too. But in terms of it opening doors, really it was De La Hoya starting a Latino company. Because from that economical standpoint, until you're the one with the purse strings, you don't really hold that power. And when he went from fighter to owner, it changed a lot of that. That being said, it's still portrayed a lot. You know, whether it's boxers in a movie or the cholos in you know, some TV show, or there. As Latinos progress through the American culture, we're going to see that continue, but also change as it has for other minority groups. To me, it's particularly interesting because outside of Mexicans, most Americans don't think of Latinos as minorities. They think of people from Mexico as a minority, and the Latinos are some other sort of like strange breed they haven't figured out yet. So I think that also, to a certain extent, opens some possibilities.
Just one sport that I follow a little bit that does have a lot of Latino representation is the Professional Bull Riders Association, which has basically half of the athletes are from Brazil, and so there's a very large Latino contingent in that American-based sport.
Interesting. I had no idea, and a very good friend of mine is a trauma nurse on the bull riding circuit. I had no idea. Interesting. I wonder how much of that comes from seasonal workers in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico, where they've come across and kind of settled in.
I'm not for sure what the history of it is, but there's a pretty famous competition every year that pits the Americans versus the Brazilians, and so and there is also a PBR leg in Brazil, so there's an international flair to it as well outside of the U.S.
Interesting. Very cool. I had no idea. Now I've got to look into it.
I actually went to a bullfight in Spain when I was there, and it was very interesting to watch, like the matadors and everything. I was like, that's almost my extent of bull riding, but it was interesting to see.
Absolutely. Machismo. I think, Craig, that's probably another reason you see a lot of Latinos in the pugilistic side, is because of the concept of machismo. I mean, it's such a pervasive concept and unique to that culture that we don't even have a word for it in English. We just have to use it. There's no equivalent. That and I had kind of jumped back and forth on this, but the whole world of Mexican professional wrestling, the whole Nacho Libre sort of thing. I decided to leave that on the side, but that certainly has brought some of that culture and concept into our side of the border. Alrighty. Well, I have certainly enjoyed this, and thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. I really learned a lot. I did not know a lot of that. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you virtually.
Absolutely. You'll take care.
Okay.
Good job, Alberto. We'll see you later.
Cheers. Take care, Craig.